my dear ones, lean in close. The wind is whispering tonight, and it carries a truth that has been spoken since the beginning of time. It is the truth of where we place our feet, where we kneel our weary souls, where we lift our voices in prayer. You see, not all churches wear a steeple. Not all sanctuaries are built of stone. Some, my loves, are made of fear. Some are built brick by brick with doubt. And some are nothing but prisons disguised as places of worship. So I tell you now, before you enter, before you bow, before you surrender your spirit to a house that does not know the name of love, heed this warning. There are 3 churches you must never enter, 3 places that will steal the light from your eyes, the courage from your heart, the purpose from your walk. Ah, my dear ones, I have seen that church. I have stood at its door, felt the chill of its shadow, heard the whispers that curl like smoke beneath its rafters. The church of shame. It is a mighty place, wide as the desert, high as the tallest mountain. Yet inside the air is thin. Inside the walls lean in close, pressing tight, pressing low, pressing all the breath from your spirit. And the people, oh, the people, they do not walk upright in this place. No, they shuffle, they stoop, they bow their heads so low that their chins brush the dust. For they have been told time and time again that they are not enough, not pure enough, not holy enough, not worthy enough to stand tall in the presence of grace. I tell you, I have seen them, these keepers of shame. They wear robes woven with judgment. They carry books filled with laws too heavy for the human heart. They whisper in tones that sound like sermons but cut like knives. Do you remember what you did? They ask. Do you know what you've become? They sneer. You cannot be loved, not as you are, they say, their voices dripping with the false sweetness of condemnation. And so the people shrink. They fold into themselves like crumpled paper, as if to make themselves small enough to disappear. They press their hands over their hearts, trying to quiet the sound of their own worth. But listen to me now. Do not enter. For the God I know does not dwell in the house of shame. The God I know is not a list of rules, not a finger pointed in scorn, not a ledger of your wrongs. No, my loves, the God I know is the breath in your lungs, the fire in your spirit, the whisper that tells you, you are loved. I once knew a woman, oh, she was a sight. A woman who had walked through fire, who had fallen to her knees more times than she could count. She had made mistakes, yes. Mistakes that painted her past in shades of regret. And when she entered that church, that great looming place of shame, they turned to her with eyes that did not see her at all. You do not belong here, they said. You have fallen too far, they said. And so she believed them. She turned from the altar, from the light, from the hope of a love that would not let her go. She carried their words on her back like a heavy sack of stones, dragging them with her wherever she went. But one day, oh, one day the wind rose up and whispered her name. The river called to her, the sky stretched wide before her, and something deep inside, a thing she had thought long buried, began to stir. She stood, she stretched, she rose, and when she walked, she did not walk back to that house of shame. No, she walked into the light. She walked into the truth. She walked into a love that had been waiting for her all along. So I tell you now, if you find yourself standing before a door that tells you you are unworthy, do not enter. If they tell you that your past is bigger than your future, do not enter. If they demand that you shrink, that you cower, that you tremble in the presence of the divine, turn away. For you were not made for shame. You were made for glory. You were made to stand tall, to walk free, to know without a doubt, without a question, without a single hesitation, that you are enough. You are enough. You are enough. Oh, my dear ones, you have always been enough. There is a house grand and looming, where the doors creak with the weight of trembling hearts. It is a house built not with love, but with shadow. A house where voices do not sing, but whisper. A house where faith is not a river that flows, but a chain that binds. I have seen that house. I have walked through its doors. It stands tall, carved with words that sound holy but feel heavy. The walls echo with the same refrain over and over, like the toll of a mournful bell. Be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. They will tell you that fear is the beginning of wisdom, that to tremble is to believe, that a bowed head and a hushed tongue are signs of a faithful heart. They will warn you of a God who watches not with love but with suspicion, a God who measures your every step, waiting for the moment you falter, waiting for the moment he can turn his back on you. And so the people shrink. They fold their hands not in peace, but in worry. They walk not in faith, but in fear. I once knew a woman who sat in that house, a woman with hands that had known work, a woman with eyes that had seen sorrow, a woman whose heart had longed, oh, how it had longed, to believe in a love that did not flinch at the sight of her. She had been told since she was young that God was watching and that his eyes were sharp, that he kept a ledger, each mistake marked with ink that could never be erased. She believed them. She believed that love was a thing to be earned, that mercy was a thing to be bargained for, that heaven was a door too narrow for a woman like her to enter. So she sat in silence. She carried the weight of her shame, the weight of her fear, the weight of a God she did not know how to love. But one day, one bright and glorious day, she stepped outside, and for the first time in a long time, she lifted her head. She saw the sun stretch wide across the sky. She heard the wind call her name. She felt the earth steady beneath her feet, as if whispering, "You belong." And something inside her stirred, something ancient, something holy. It was the truth she had known before the world told her otherwise. It was the truth that had been singing in her bones since the day she was born. She was not made for fear. She was not made for silence. She was made for love. So she walked, not back to that house, not back to that place where faith was laced with fear, where love was rationed out like bread too scarce to be shared. She walked into the open. She walked into the light. And when they asked her, "Are you not afraid?" she smiled. For she knew now what she had not known before, that the God who shaped the stars did not place fear in her heart, that the God who called the ocean to rise did not make her to cower, that the God who formed her, piece by piece, had never once looked at her in anger, only love. So I tell you, my dear ones, if you find yourself in that house, if the words spoken to you make your hands tremble, if they teach you to fear the very one who made you, if they say love is something you must earn, something you must chase, something just beyond your reach, turn away, for the God of fear is no God at all. The God of chains is no God at all. The God I know does not whisper, "Be afraid." He calls out loud and clear, "Be free." There is a place where power is the altar and pride is the hymn. A place where voices do not tremble in reverence, but rise in command, where the pulpit is not a place of healing, but a throne. And the hands that should uplift are clenched into fists. I have seen that place. I have stood at its door and felt the weight of its walls pressing against the sky. It is a mighty house, built not on grace, but on ego, not on mercy, but on control. The men who stand there do not speak with tenderness. They do not call you home with love. No, they demand, they dictate, they decree. They wear their robes like armor and their titles like crowns, believing themselves kings in a kingdom that was never theirs to rule. They say obey, they say submit. They say, do not question, do not think, do not dream too boldly, do not reach too high. And so the people bow. They bow not in worship, but in fear. They lower their gaze, they still their hands, they hush the songs in their throats, because they have been told that faith is not a thing that dances, it is a thing that kneels. But I tell you now, if you find yourself in that house, do not enter. For the God I know is not found in the clenched fists of tyrants. He is not wrapped in the garments of the self-righteous. He does not stand on high and demand that you grovel low. No, my loves, the God I know kneels to lift the weary. He bends to bind the broken. He does not sit upon a throne of gold, but walks among us, calling, "Come home." I once knew a woman who sat in that house, a woman with fire in her bones, a woman with a spirit too big to be contained. But they told her, "No, child, no woman, no daughter of the Most High. Your voice is too loud," they said. "Your questions are too many," they said. "Your place is beneath, never beside," they said. And so she bent. She bent her back under the weight of their words, bent her will to fit within the walls they built for her. She made herself smaller, quieter, lesser. She let their voices drown out the one that had whispered to her from the very beginning, "You were made for more." But one day, oh, one day, she heard something else. Not the booming command of the pulpit, not the sharp-edged doctrines of men who mistook control for holiness. No, she heard the wind. She heard the river. She heard the voice that had been calling her all along, soft but strong, gentle but unshakable. Rise. And so she did. She stood, she straightened, she let the truth unfurl within her like a banner in the breeze. She stepped out from that house of false power, out from under the weight of men who mistook their pride for God's will. And when they asked, "Where do you think you are going?" she smiled, for she knew in her marrow, knew in her breath, knew with a certainty that could not be shaken. She was already free. So I tell you now, if you find yourself in a place where the voices of men have grown louder than the voice of God, turn away. If they teach you to bow to them instead of to love Him, walk on. If they build a kingdom where only a few may enter, let it crumble behind you. For the God I know does not rule by fear. He does not chain. He does not silence. No, He lifts. He restores. He calls you by name and sets your feet on solid ground. So lift your head, stretch your arms wide, let your feet move freely in the grace you were always meant to walk in. And when you step forward, step boldly, step surely, step knowing that no man can take from you what God Himself has given. There is a place where silence is mistaken for peace, a place where the air is thick with quiet suffering, where smiles are stretched thin like old cloth, hiding the weariness beneath. It is a place where people come seeking refuge, seeking warmth, seeking the arms of God Himself, only to find doors that open wide, but hearts that stay closed. I have seen that place. I have walked through its doors and felt the chill of indifference. It is a house built not with love, but with politeness, not with compassion, but with custom. The words spoken there are smooth, soft, easy, but not true. They preach love, but do not practice it. They speak of kindness, but do not extend it. They lift their hands in worship, but do not stretch them toward the weary, the broken, the outcast. They say, "Be well." They say, "We will pray for you." They say, "God loves you." And yet, when the hungry come, they do not feed them. When the wounded arrive, they do not bind their wounds. When the lost reach out, they do not take their hands. And so the people suffer, alone, invisible, unseen beneath the glow of stained glass windows. I once knew a man who sat in that house, a man with a past heavy as iron, a heart weary from too many roads walked alone. He had been told that church was a place for healing, that in the presence of God, he would find welcome arms. So he went. He sat in the back, hands folded, breath shallow. He listened, he waited, but no one saw him. No one spoke to him. No one asked him his name. And so he left, just as he came, alone. But let me tell you something, my dear ones. The God I know does not pass by the wounded. The God I know does not sit comfortably while his children suffer in silence. The God I know stops. He sees, he speaks, he calls them by name. So I tell you now, if you find yourself in a house where love is spoken but not shown, where grace is preached but not lived, where the hurting are ignored while the righteous sit unbothered in their pews, do not enter. If the people sing with their mouths but do not love with their hands, if they lift their voices but do not lift the fallen, if they bow their heads in prayer but do not lift their eyes to see their suffering neighbor, walk away. For faith without love is an empty thing, a cold thing, a thing that rings like a hollow bell in the wind. The God I know does not sit high above and watch from a distance. No, he walks among us. He bends to lift the weary. He kneels to wash the feet of the broken. He opens his arms wide as the sky and says, "Come." And when you find that place, not a house of indifference, but a home of belonging, step inside, step bold, step sure, step knowing that you too were meant to be seen. And then when another arrives, wounded, weary, waiting, be the one who sees them, be the one who speaks their name, be the one who loves as God himself loves. For love is not a sermon, love is not a song, love is a hand that reaches out. And my dear ones, love, real love, never looks away. There is a place where truth is bound in chains, a place where light is dimmed, where questions are met not with wisdom, but with warning, where curiosity is called rebellion and searching is called sin. It is a place where the mind is told to sit down, where the soul is told to hush, where faith is not a thing that soars, but a thing that submits. Without question, without thought, without voice. I have seen that place. I have stood within its walls and felt the weight of silence pressing against my skin. It is a mighty house, built not on revelation, but on restriction, not on understanding, but on fear. The voices that echo there do not invite, they do not encourage, they do not guide. No, they dictate, they declare, they demand. They say, do not ask. They say, do not wonder. They say, do not reach beyond what we have given you. Do not seek beyond what we have said. Do not look beyond the narrow path we have carved for you. And so the people shrink. They lower their eyes. They quiet their thought. They fold their hands and still their questions, believing that faith is a thing locked in a box, a thing held tight between clenched fists, a thing that must not move, must not change, must not breathe. But I tell you now, if you find yourself in that house, do not enter. For the God I know is not afraid of your questions. The God I know does not tremble when you seek. The God I know is not made weak by the wondering mind, by the curious heart, by the spirit that longs to understand. No, my loves, the God I know says, come. Come with your questions. Come with your doubts. Come with your hunger, your thirst, your longing to know, to see, to understand. I once knew a child who sat in that house, a child with eyes like open windows, with a mind like a river, always moving, always searching, always seeking the deeper things, the wider truths. And oh, how they tried to still her. They said, sit down. They said, be quiet. They said, do not ask, do not wonder, do not stray too far from the answers we have given you. And for a time, she obeyed. For a time, she held her questions in her hands like pebbles, small and smooth and silent. For a time, she made herself smaller, quieter, less. But the truth, oh, the truth cannot be caged. The truth cannot be stilled. The truth cannot be silenced. And so the child grew. And so the questions grew. And so the longing in her soul grew until it was too big to be contained, too strong to be denied. And one day she rose. One day she stepped beyond those walls. One day she stretched her hands toward the sky and asked, boldly, bravely, beautifully, "Who are you truly?" And in the hush that followed, in the quiet that was not empty but full, she heard something new. Not the voices of men who feared the unknown, not the warnings of those who mistook control for wisdom. No, she heard the whisper of the divine. She heard the voice that had been waiting for her all along. She heard the words that changed everything. Seek and you will find. So I tell you now, if you find yourself in a place where questions are forbidden, where doubt is condemned, where truth is kept in a locked room and guarded with fear, walk away. For faith is not a prison. Faith is not a chain. Faith is not a thing that binds you to the small, to the safe, to the known. No, faith is a door. Faith is a sky wide open. Faith is the hand of God himself, reaching, calling, inviting. Come. So step forward. Step fearless. Step knowing that truth is not fragile, that wisdom is not afraid, that love does not lock its doors. And when you walk, walk boldly. Walk freely, walk knowing that the God who made you also made your mind, your wonder, your yearning to understand, and he will not turn you away. My dear ones, hear me now. There will always be houses that call themselves holy, places that wear the name of God like a robe, but do not walk in his truth. There will be doors that open wide, but do not welcome. Voices that preach, but do not love. Hands that lift in prayer, but do not reach for the broken. But you are not called to be blind. You are not called to be silent. You are not called to bow before anything less than truth itself. Walk with wisdom. Walk with courage. Walk with a heart that knows the difference between a house of God and a house of men who have forgotten him. And when you find a place that breathes love, that sings mercy, that moves with grace, step inside, stand tall, know that you belong, not because they have made room for you, but because God already has. Now go forth, go with strength, go with fire in your bones, go with truth in your hands, and wherever you walk, let love walk with you. Good luck, and thank you.